Question. About 4 years ago, I found a book that was about Gnosis. Not gnostic, but based on ancient teachings from the Orthodox Church about ascension. Excellent work. The author spoke of finding a person called the sister wife or polar opposite to you. This person is similar to what currently is called a twin flame, although I don't like that phrase as it has been ground into New Age trifle. As it happened, I had an experience like what the author spoke about, and it was quite enlightening. During that period with a person, she was very influential in my finding the Ascended Masters. That relation has since ended to my dismay. Could you comment on this sort of mystical encounter with the polar opposite? Well, yes, I can of course comment on it. I don't know if I'm the best person to comment on it because I have a non-standard view of this whole concept of twin flames or sister wife or polar opposite. I first heard about this concept of twin flames in an organization I was involved with called the Soulmate Lighthouse, which was very big on twin flames, has some very extensive teachings on it. The Soulmate Lighthouse was started by a man called Mark Prophet, who married a younger woman called Elizabeth Clare Prophet, and it was claimed that they were twin flames. And many people in the organization were attracted to the concept of twin flames. They were looking for the twin flame. There were even some that were told by either Mark or Elizabeth that they were twin flames, and they got married, and they thought it would be happily ever after. And they had very difficulty dealing with the fact that it wasn't happily ever after because they had their psychology to deal with. And in fact, if you look at Mark and Elizabeth Prophet, they also had different psychologies that caused various friction between them. So when I first heard about this concept, this was back in 86, 7, it didn't resonate with me. I just wasn't interested in it. I met many people who went into this romantic, I would say, overly romantic desire to find this one and only love that was the perfect love relationship. I could never get into it. I could never engage in it. And I was not an openly rebellious person. It wasn't like I was going around questioning the teachings on it, but I just never paid much attention to it. And the reason for this is that I have one very clear sense or inner knowing that I am an individual being. I was created as an individual being. My I am presence is an individual being that is complete in and of itself. I can't quite remember the teachings about twin flames in the summit, but I think they said, if I remember correctly, that two I am presences were created as a tandem, as twin flames. I think that's what they said. I never agreed with that. I never sensed that. My inner knowing told me that's not the case. And what the Ascended Masters have said later through me is that when we go into duality, when we go below the 48th level, we have such an imbalance in our being that we are assigned another soul that has gone into duality. You see what I'm saying with duality, those two polar opposites? So when you go into duality, you tend to go towards one, and then you have another person that tends to go to the opposite, and you are put in a pair with theirs so you can balance each other. But it doesn't mean that it's the ideal love relationship, because it doesn't mean you have the same psychology. You have the opposite psychology. And the meaning is that by smoothing or grinding off the rough edges of each other, you both come to be more balanced. That's the high potential of it. As I saw in the Soulmate Lighthouse, and as you can see in many other spiritual movements, in many cases, the sharp edges become sharper, and because people aren't willing to look at their own psychology. So my sense of it is that I am a singular being, the conscious you. I have an outer personality, yes, created over many lifetimes in reaction to Earth and even being on a natural planet. I have an I am presence. My I am presence is a singular being. In essence, if you want to talk about a twin flame, or some other being that I'm tied to. As the conscious you, I'm tied to the I Am Presence. I'm out of the I Am Presence. My twin flame, ultimately, my twin flame is my I Am Presence, not another individual being. So, so does that mean I think all of these people are wrong when they think they have this ultimate love relationship? Well, yes and no. I mean, I have a playlist where I talk about ego games. And people can play all kinds of games. The ego can play all kinds of games. And one of the games that the ego plays is that you want to be special. So I have seen people in spiritual movements who, out of their desire to be special, came up with this idea, or they accepted this idea of twin flames, and they projected that there was another person who was their twin flame. And maybe they both agreed on this and they started a relationship because they thought this was the most special relationship you could have with your twin flame. So for me, this is just an ego game. And for most people, it ends up in disaster, or disappointment at least. But that's not to say that there aren't genuine love relationships where you can feel a special closeness with one person that you obviously don't feel with others. I'm not saying there isn't that. But to me, it's more of what some people call a soulmate, where you have, and there can be various levels of this, but the most immediate one is that you spend many lifetimes together with a certain other soul. And therefore you know that person and you harmonize with each other and you can help each other, and that can give you a very special sense of closeness, even a deeper love for each other. But this is something, you weren't created that way. This is something you have attained by being together and by selflessly helping each other grow. So I think it's more at that level you have these special relationships. Then of course you can go a little bit deeper and you can say that our masters have explained that there were different groups or waves of life streams that embodied on Earth. So today there were first 3 groups. There are in some earlier Ascended Master teaching called root races. And most of those have ascended. But you could still theoretically have 2 life streams who were from the same root race, and therefore have a certain familiarity with each other. Then you have the concept of avatars that the masters have given through me. And it is that we came from another planet that's a natural planet to Earth. And of course there are many different natural planets. It wasn't like all avatars came from the same natural planet. So you could have 2 avatars who came from the same planet and who might very well have known each other on that planet and therefore decided together to come to Earth. So again, they can have a special relationship that's deeper than other people have. So those kind of things I'm completely open to. But it's just, I don't see it as you were created that way. Because, you know, what the masters have explained is that even the I Am Presence is created with this very localized sense of self, sense of identity. And by having all the experiences we're having in this undescended sphere, we gradually grow. So we are growing into, and our I Am Presences are growing into the being we are today. It's like you have to be very careful here that, you know, there's some very easy misunderstandings that I've seen people get into. I've given these non-duality videos about the concept of no self. And they will say that all that we have created here in this world, all that we are in this world, is a separate self, and it's not real. Because in reality, we are infinite awareness or Brahman or whatever. And it's a matter of overcoming this sense of self and returning to the state of no self. And I've talked about why I don't agree with that. But the main reason I don't agree with it is that in my inner knowing, we were created with this localized sense of self, point-like sense of self, and we are meant to transcend our sense of self and keep doing this until we reach the creator consciousness and even go beyond it. So the expansion of that self, which is not a separate self, it's an individual self, that's the purpose of life. So even in the Summit Lighthouse, and even in the earlier movement called the I Am movement, where they introduced the concept of the I Am presence, it sounded like the I Am presence was some kind of godlike figure that was perfect from the very beginning. But the I Am presence is a growing being. It's growing and expanding and evolving, partly by sending the conscious you into an undescended sphere on a planet like Earth. So it's very important for us that we don't get into this idea that we have to return to some perfect state. We actually have to grow into a higher state. It's not a matter of something has gone wrong and we need to return to it at the level of the I Am presence. However, this is different at the level of the conscious you. And it's important to have that distinction. The I Am presence is an individual being. It's transcending its sense of self and growing into a more and more expanded, more and more aware self. The conscious you, however, is an extension of the I Am presence that's sent into having experiences in this undescended sphere. And it's sent as pure awareness, neutral awareness. In other words, it doesn't have any outer personality. The outer personality we take on when I talk about the identity level, the mental, the emotional, and the physical. All of this is our outer personality. What most people, most spiritual teachings call the soul. That's just the outer personality. This is something we have taken on here on Earth and we have created over many lifetimes. Some of them have been in embodiment many, many lifetimes on Earth, many of us on natural planets. So we have created this outer personality. But at the same time, we've also helped the I Am presence grow and expand its sense of self. And the outer personality is not who we are. There is a part of this outer personality that we just took on in order to take embodiment. And then there's a part of it that we took on after we went below the 48th level of consciousness into separation. And that's what we can really call a separate self. So yes, the separate self is unreal. We have to overcome that. And the conscious you has to return to this state of pure awareness that it descended with in order for the conscious you to go back into oneness with the I Am presence. So at the level of conscious you, yes, there was an original state that we are meant to return to. But at the level of the I Am presence, there is only continued growth. Nothing went wrong at the level of the I Am presence, even if we have gone into duality and separation. Nothing went wrong at the level. The I Am presence is growing constantly as we are having all these experiences, even if we go into separation. So there's the two levels, and we have to be aware of that. So, in other words, again, the I Am presence was not created in the state of perfection. Therefore, there wasn't a twin flame that was created so that the two of them together are perfect, because this is what was said in the Summit. You're only really a whole with your twin flame. But the I Am presence was created as this point-like self. Where's the room for polarity? There's no polarity there. So what can happen, and I'm not saying it couldn't happen, that two I Am presences would form a more perfect union, to quote the Declaration of Independence, and grow closer together. I'm not saying that can't happen, but we weren't created like that. It's something we can grow into. Anyway, that is my take on it. I'm sure that if people who have been in some kind of New Age movement where they really focus on these twin flames, if they heard this, they would probably vehemently disagree. And perhaps that'll be interesting to see what might come out of such a discussion. I'm certainly not thinking that my view is the only possible view or the only right one, but that's what I have come to after these many years of dealing with this concept of twin flames, and especially seeing how other people have gone into really created a lot of difficulties from themselves by having this romanticized view of twin flames.